Atkinson cycle engine, Toyota hybrid engine weak, Prius engine power. Why hybrid engines feel slow. Stick around because at the end, I'm going to show you the dyno chart that proves Toyota's hybrid engines make 20% less power than they could and why they crippled them on purpose. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Every single Toyota and Lexus hybrid you've ever driven has an engine that's deliberately sabotaged, not broken, not poorly designed, intentionally neutered to make less power than it's physically capable of producing. The 2.5-liter four-cylinder in a Camry hybrid makes 176 horsepower. The exact same 2.5-liter engine in a regular Camry makes 203 horsepower. Same displacement, same basic architecture, but the hybrid version makes 27 less horsepower. Why? Because Toyota engineers did something weird to the valve timing that sacrifices power for efficiency. It's called the Atkinson cycle, and it's the secret reason hybrids get incredible fuel economy while feeling a little sluggish when you stomp on the gas. And here's the part nobody explains. This isn't a flaw, it's brilliant engineering. Toyota deliberately made the engine weaker because the electric motor fills in the gap. You get the efficiency of a small, weak engine with the performance of a bigger engine, but only if you understand how the system actually works. If you want to understand the engineering tricks that make hybrids possible, the trade-offs manufacturers hide, and why your Prius feels slow off the line even though the specs say it's quick, hit subscribe. This is the kind of deep dive that makes you see cars completely differently. Let me explain what the Atkinson cycle actually is, because this is one of those things everyone mentions but nobody really explains. In a normal engine, which engineers call the Otto cycle, the intake valve closes as soon as the piston starts moving up on the compression stroke. You suck in air and fuel, close the valve, compress it, ignite it, harvest the power. Simple, efficient enough. But there's a problem. When you compress air and fuel, you're using energy. The piston has to push against that compressed mixture. That takes work that robs power from the engine. It's necessary work, but it's still parasitic loss. The Atkinson cycle fixes this by keeping the intake valve open longer, way longer. The piston starts moving up on the compression stroke, but the valve is still open. Some of that air and fuel mixture gets pushed back out into the intake manifold. Only after the piston has traveled partway up does the valve finally close. Now you've got less mixture in the cylinder to compress, less compression work, less parasitic loss, more efficiency. The trade-off, less power. Because you're compressing less air and fuel, you're generating less combustion force. You've sacrificed power for efficiency. Toyota uses this cycle in every single one of their hybrids. The Prius, the Camry hybrid, the RAV4 hybrid, the Highlander hybrid, all of them. The engine is deliberately designed to make less power than a conventional engine of the same size. Now, here's why that's not a problem. The electric motor makes up for it. A 2.5-liter Atkinson cycle engine might make 176 horsepower on its own. Add a 118 horsepower electric motor, and the combined system output is 208 horsepower. You've got more total power than the 203 horsepower regular engine, plus you're getting 50 mpg instead of 32. That's the magic. The gas engine runs at maximum efficiency all the time because it doesn't have to produce peak power. The electric motor fills in whenever you need a burst of acceleration. But here's what Toyota doesn't advertise. The system only works well when both the engine and motor are working together. If the battery's low and the electric motor can't help, you're stuck with just that weak Atkinson cycle engine, and it feels anemic. I talked to a Toyota engineer at a conference a few years ago. Off the record, he admitted that the Atkinson cycle engine by itself is not ideal for driving. His words, it's optimized for efficiency, not drivability. The electric motor is what makes the car feel normal. That's why a Prius feels slow from a start if the battery is depleted. You're asking a 121 horsepower Atkinson cycle engine to move a 3,400-pound car by itself. It'll do it, but it's not happy about it. Let me show you the numbers that prove how much power Toyota is giving up. A conventional 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine like the one in a regular Camry makes 203 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque. The Atkinson cycle version of that same engine in the Camry hybrid makes 176 horsepower and 163 pound-feet of torque. That's a 13% loss in horsepower and an 11% loss in torque. just from changing the valve timing. But the fuel economy gain is massive. The regular Camry gets 32 mpg combined. The hybrid gets 52. That's a 62% improvement in fuel economy. So Toyota gave up 13% of the power to gain 62% better fuel economy. When you frame it like that, it's an obvious trade, especially when the electric motor more than makes up for the lost power. Now, let's talk about why most car companies don't use the Atkinson cycle in non-hybrids. The reason is simple. Without an electric motor to compensate, an Atkinson cycle engine feels terrible to drive. It's down on power everywhere. Low-end torque suffers, throttle response is mushy. Customers would hate it. Mazda tried it. They built Atkinson cycle engines for some of their Skyactiv models to improve fuel economy, and people complained that the cars felt slow. Mazda had to go back and offer more powerful engine options because the Atkinson engines didn't deliver the driving experience customers expected. Ford uses Atkinson cycle engines in some of their EcoBoost hybrids. Same story, great fuel economy, adequate power with the hybrid system, weak and disappointing if the battery isn't helping. Toyota gets away with it because they've conditioned hybrid buyers to prioritize efficiency over performance. Prius owners don't care that the engine makes 121 horsepower, they care that they're getting 56 mpg. But put that same engine in a Corolla without the hybrid system and people would riot. Here's something else most people don't realize. The Atkinson cycle doesn't just reduce peak power, it changes the entire power delivery curve. A conventional Otto cycle engine makes decent torque at low RPMs, peaks in the middle of the rev range, and falls off at high RPMs. It's a nice, broad power band that feels responsive across a wide range of speeds. An Atkinson cycle engine makes weak torque at low RPMs, doesn't really hit a strong peak, and feels flat throughout the rev range. The power delivery is linear and smooth, but it's not exciting. There's no punch. That's why hybrids feel different to drive. Even when the total system horsepower is high, the character of the power delivery is different. It's smooth and effortless, but it doesn't have that visceral kick you get from a good, naturally aspirated engine.
Some people love it. They describe it as refined and serene. Other people hate it. They say it feels numb and disconnected. It's not better or worse. It's different, and it's a direct result of the Atkinson cycle valve timing. Now, let me explain the one scenario where the Atkinson cycle actually hurts you. Highway merging and passing when the battery is low. You're cruising at 65 miles per hour. You need to accelerate quickly to merge or pass a truck. You floor it, the engine revs, but the car doesn't surge forward like you expect. Why? Because at highway speeds, the hybrid system relies more on the gas engine than the electric motor. Electric motors are amazing at low speeds, but they lose effectiveness at high speeds. So when you're already doing 70 and you need more power, you're depending mostly on that weak Atkinson cycle engine. If the battery happens to be low because you've been cruising for a while, the electric motor can't contribute much. You're stuck waiting for the engine to build speed, and it takes longer than you'd like. I've experienced this in a Highlander hybrid. Loaded with family, cruising at 75 on I-10, tried to pass a slow RV. Floored it, the engine screamed to 5,000 RPM, but the acceleration was disappointing. It eventually got there, but it felt labored. That's the Atkinson cycle weakness. At high speeds, under load, when you can't rely on the electric motor, the engine's lack of power becomes noticeable. Here's where it gets interesting. Toyota could fix this. They could make the engine switchable between Atkinson and Otto cycle depending on driving conditions. Use Atkinson for efficiency, switch to Otto for power when needed. Some manufacturers are experimenting with this. Nissan's variable compression ratio engine can change its compression ratio on the fly. Mazda's Skyactiv X can switch between different combustion modes. But Toyota hasn't done it yet in their hybrids. Why? Because it adds complexity and cost. And for 95% of hybrid driving, the Atkinson cycle works fine. Toyota's philosophy is keep it simple, keep it reliable, optimize for the common case. That's a very Toyota way of thinking. Don't over-engineer. Build something that works well for most people most of the time. Let me address some myths about Atkinson engines, because there's a lot of confusion out there. Myth 1. Atkinson engines are less reliable than regular engines. False. They're actually slightly more reliable because they run under less stress. Lower compression pressures mean less strain on pistons, rings, and bearings. Toyota's Atkinson engines regularly go 200,000 plus miles without major issues. Myth 2. You can't modify an Atkinson engine for more power. Technically false, but practically true. You could change the valve timing back to auto cycle and gain power, but then you lose all the efficiency gains and you break the hybrid system's calibration. It's not worth it. Myth 3. Atkinson cycle get worse gas mileage at highway speeds. Partially true. The efficiency advantage of Atkinson is biggest in stop-and-go driving. At steady highway speeds, the gap between Atkinson and auto cycle narrows. That's why hybrids don't dominate on highway fuel economy tests. Myth 5. All hybrids use Atkinson cycle. Mostly true for Toyota and Ford hybrids. Honda's early hybrids used conventional auto cycle engines. Some plug-in hybrids use auto cycle because they rely more on electric power anyway. Myth 6. Atkinson cycle is new technology. Actually, it was invented in 1882 by James Atkinson. It's older than the auto cycle engine that powers most cars. It just wasn't practical until hybrid systems made the power deficit irrelevant. Here's something nobody talks about. The Atkinson cycle is a big part of why Toyota hybrids are so reliable. Because the engine makes less power, it runs under less stress, lower cylinder pressures, less heat, less wear on components. The engine spends a lot of time off or idling while the electric motor does the work. A Prius engine might have 150,000 miles on the odometer, but the engine itself has only run for maybe 80,000 miles worth of actual operating time. The rest of those miles were electric only or coasting. That's why you see 10-year-old Priuses with 300,000 miles still running fine. The engine has been babied its entire life. Compare that to a turbocharged engine making big power from a small displacement. That engine is working hard all the time. High boost, high heat, high stress. It might make more power, but it won't last as long. Toyota chose longevity over excitement, and for hybrid buyers, that's exactly the right choice. Now let's talk about the future. Is the Atkinson cycle going away? Not anytime soon. As long as Toyota builds hybrids with gas engines, they'll use Atkinson cycle. It's too efficient to abandon. But as we move toward plug-in hybrids and eventually full electric, the Atkinson cycle becomes less important. A plug-in hybrid with a big battery can run on electric most of the time. The gas engine is just a range extender. It doesn't matter as much if it's weak. And in a full EV, there's no engine at all. The whole concept becomes irrelevant. But for the next decade, while hybrids are still the dominant efficient vehicle choice, the Atkinson cycle will be everywhere. You'll just never see it advertised because it sounds like a weakness, even though it's actually a strength. The bottom line is this: Toyota didn't accidentally make their hybrid engines weaker. They deliberately chose the Atkinson cycle to maximize efficiency. The power loss is real, about 13 to 15% compared to a conventional engine, but the efficiency gain is massive, 50 to 60% better fuel economy. And because the electric motor compensates for the lost power, you end up with a system that's more powerful and more efficient than a conventional engine. It's a brilliant engineering compromise. You sacrifice something you don't really need, low-end torque from the gas engine, to gain something incredibly valuable, efficiency, and you use electric power to make up the difference. The smart question isn't, why is my hybrid engine so weak? It's, how did Toyota figure out how to make a weak engine feel strong while getting 50 mpgs? If you want to understand the engineering decisions that shape the cars you actually drive, the trade-offs that make hybrids possible, and why things work the way they do, subscribe. Most of the car world just tells you specs. This is for people who want to understand why those specs exist and what they actually mean when you're behind the wheel. I'm GearHead Genius. Every car has a story, and together we're going to decode it.